All right, everybody, we are back again for another episode of the Coach's Compass. Don't know what episode it is because we just continue to roll and bring on cool guests from all over the world. Now, remember, hit that like, subscribe, comment button down below. It's your boy, Coach Coop, reporting live all the way from the US of A. Coach J can't be with us today because he is traveling right now. Again, still going through his last year, so trying to figure out everything. But we've got another dope guest with us today. We got Tara reporting live from Canada. Again, Canada, stand up. So, Coach Tara has worked in the field of exercise science as a physiologist and administrator for over 25 years. She spent a number of the early years in the field applying her knowledge to the development of training and monitoring programs for elite professionals, including NHL, AHL, WHL, CFL, and MLB, and amateur athletes of all kinds. Keen to further her understanding of clinical populations and broaden her skill set, she transitioned her focus to cardiac rehabilitation and championed multiple research and programming initiatives. A strong passion for sport eventually called her back to consulting work for a number of professional and amateur sport organizations, including Bobsleigh Skeleton Canada and the Canadian Luge Association, where she developed the sliding sport long-term athlete development framework. The Canadian sport, and also she's developed this Canadian Sport Initiative and eventually Win Sport. She is the Canadian Sport, Canadian Sport Institute, which is the Win Sport. She's regularly, so much here to read, and it's just the bio is going crazy. Of note, she was specifically chosen by the coaching staff of the Calgary Stampeders to employ that particular expertise with their players during the 2022 training camp as part of the first CFL KPMG Women in Football initiative. She also enjoys teaching and mentoring exercise professionals as to raising performance thresholds and frequently public speaking as to those topics and how to extend and the sport lives overall career expectancy of athletes. She is also currently the president of the board of directors for Bobsleigh Canada Skeleton. So Tara, welcome, thank you. And that's only like a snippet of the bio because there's a lot that you have going on. But thank you for being here with us and welcome. So no. It speaks to the expertise and the experience and everything that you've gone through. But like, what got you so interested in it? Because over 25 years of work, what got you so interested into all of this and working with athletes and being on this side of things?
Frustration with myself. Like, I was an athlete that couldn't keep it together. Like it felt like I was MVP of a tournament or something, and then it was go sit in the car, you suck. Like it was so all over the place and really disappointed in myself. I also didn't have the best sport experiences. There's a lot of tough coaching back then. Didn't grow up the easiest and struggled. Struggled a lot with myself. And sport was always meant to be such a great vehicle for an outlet. Like I loved everything. I played everything I possibly could do, through everything I possibly could, ran track, did all of it. And I just struggled. And so initially I just was really lost and was like, why can't I perform when it counts? And why do other people seem to do that? And I lost out on a possible opportunity to get a scholarship to the US to play one sport. And I knew that girls had gone on to do much better than I had. So it was born out of, and it wasn't necessarily because they played better at times. So I was so frustrated in myself. And then I just was interested in sports psychology. Like, what was it that I could learn about the sports psych side? But then I ended up literally falling into the sports science program. It was one of the first years through it at the University of Calgary. It was performance sciences. It was really geared towards the planning strategy to get people to an Olympic Games, performance on demand. It was geared to that particular planning expertise, and it was led by a guy, Dr. Dave Smith, who just captivated me. Just tell these tales from the crypts, like we were at the side of the pool, the Olympic Games, this happened. Like he would tell these stories. We'd gather around eagerly. There's only 4 of us. and what needed to fall into place for people to perform well on demand. And I realized there was so much the physiological aspect that was driving the psychology. But I'm like, I just really glommed onto that. So I'm like, I got to figure out how to plan for this and understand what's going on in the body physiologically that allows someone to be ready to perform, and why others can't. Learned how much physiology drives the mental side, and how you have to control that, and the minutia to the planning and the strategy of just to get somebody to that place, and the army behind them really made me want to be a part of it, and say, well, maybe I didn't have my chance, but maybe I could jump in and help others. So I was like, I'm all in. Like, I love this. But that was a long time ago, and there were no women doing what I was doing. I'm tall, but I'm scrawny, and I had a real penchant for hypertrophy. Like, I had the weirdest gift. Like, I could make people big, like that. I just really figured out I had some niche skills, and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to go work in pro sport. Like, people are like, what now? Like, as if you're going to do that. But it started there. It started with just an absolute curiosity, and it was birthed out of my own hurt and insecurity and frustration, and just fascinated by folks that could put it together when it counted. And I wanted to learn how to do that.
What was it? What was it like for you to, let go of being an athlete, but still have, that drive and the passion of being a former athlete to start working with athletes? Because it's always a tough, you know, especially for guys like myself and Jay that are getting ready with being done with playing and trying to figure out what the next thing is. And I know you said you had a curiosity for how other athletes would, show up and perform, and then you were frustrated because you couldn't figure it out. But it's also a tough pill to swallow that like you're no longer going to be an athlete. How did you overcome that, and how did you navigate to get into the space, and then now so many years later, like working with so many high level athletes?
First of all, I haven't stopped playing sport. I'm still quarterbacking a team. I'm double the age of all the girls on the team, but I still play. I got back into it. I was determined to. First of all, I had to just be super brave. There's a sort of a fortuitous, maybe divine intervention, whatever I got while I was teaching. I stayed behind after grad school. The first time I was in grad school, I'm back again. And I answered a phone call from a guy that was saying they were sending a scout from the Toronto Maple Leafs, and they were sending him to Calgary, and they heard about our program, and they had 8 of their top prospects from the farm teams, that were going to train and be with this scout and some coaches in Calgary. Was there anybody in this grad school program they heard of that would be willing to take a chance on training them and testing them and getting them ready for camp testing, which was in the spring, or sorry, in the fall, in September, and so it was summer training. And my first thought was, well, there's no way I can do this. Like, it's, I'm going to go down the hall and get this guy, Bill, that I knew that was great at this stuff. And I'm like, hold on, I'll go get Bill. And then I stopped myself in the hall and said, why not me? Why don't I do it? And so I came back, I just said, listen, like, maybe this is unorthodox, but I'd like to do it. And so I talked about what I knew and my perspective. And the next thing you know, that was my first gig, was the Maple Leaf Farm team. And the reason that stood out, like how it sort of catapulted me forward, is that the time I spent, it laid down a few things for me. It laid down my process that I still follow to this day. It taught me a lot about the inner workings of pro sport, because it was sort of this scout and this group of people that were with these guys, and I was spending so much time with them, and they really welcomed me into their world at this time. But one key evening, they were sitting around a table at dinner and saying things like, okay, you got to go show up at camp. What are you going to do? And the scout / coach / the people that were there were saying, all right, you go pick a fight. I want you to get on the ice right away and pick a fight. I want you to do this. I want you to do that. And I was sitting there listening. And like, after all this physical preparation and all the work we'd done, because we worked really hard, we ended up going on. There was a camp record, or testing camp record set that year by one of the people that I trained. And he just said, you need to show up as you. You really need to show up as you. You need to be, really leverage talents everywhere. There's people vying for your position all over the place. So you've got to stand out, and you've got to stand out only on your own merits. What kind of player are you? What's your, why do you play this game? show your heart, show yourself, show your unique characteristics. And after that, I thought to myself, like, what is it that I uniquely bring to the table? And he really wanted them to leverage their story on the ice. Like, and he started talking about it. You grew up in a small town. You didn't have any chances. Like, you had to fight to get here. So get on there and fight. Get on the ice and fight. He started to tell these stories, and he really inspired them. And they were all like, okay, so I'm going to pick a fight. So what does that look like? So I started to think about that for myself. Like, who am I in this process? Why do I care about this? And how can I meaningfully connect to the athletes that I want to serve and help them not go through what I went through? And how can I do that? And so I became a student of figuring out the roadblocks. And I really worked hard to not, he basically said, you're not only competing against yourself, like don't compete against each other. You're there to just play your game. And I thought, I'm going to just play my game. I'm not going to compete against anybody else. I'm going to try to figure out what makes me different in the field. And I'm going to leverage that. And I'm not going to compete against the big guys in the gym that are like squatting the house when I've got these, I'm little whippets. And no one's who's going to take me seriously. So I've got to figure out what I can do differently. And I went to basically, pick my fight, so to speak. My first, it went on to, it opened the door to, football. I think I had the offensive line for the Calgary Stampeders was my next gig, and then it went on, and again I got picked on there, and the big guys standing there saying, "What are you going to tell us about training?" And this was the '90s, so they were laughing at me, like out and out laughing, and I was looking up, saying, "I don't know, but here's what I'm going to do, and here's what we're going to work on together." And so that story was pivotal. It just know your why, be you in the process. Don't try to compete with anybody else. Don't be anybody else. You've got to put yourself out there, no regrets. And I realized, like, in my sporting journey and whatever, I was always playing for what everybody else thought I should do. I was always trying to impress everybody else. I was always trying to make everybody else happy for whatever reason. And I realized that was one of the biggest pitfalls in my journey. It led me to some significant health issues. And so I'm like, all right, let's figure this out, and let's figure this out physiologically, and so on and so forth. So it started there with an incredible passion to not let folks flounder and squander their given potential. So and knowing physiologically that sport's a long game, you don't physiologically peak until your late 20s or 30s. So sport has to mean something along the way. It has to be different. And so I started seeing sport as a vehicle to learn to perform. The lessons are universal. They're transferable to every industry. You want to be a good athlete. It's the same being a good accountant, a good violinist, a good anything else. Like, I mean, the constructs are universal. Physiologically, that readiness, performance readiness is the same. So I started to make those connections and the rest.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about the roadblocks and then, athletes not really peaking until their late 20s, early 30s. What are some of the major like performance issues that players and coaches come to you with? And what are you doing to, help them overcome it, and that you've like kind of learned throughout the years with being a performance clinician, to help these athletes kind of peak at the right time?
Well, I think like a lot of the issues that people started to come to me with were coaches initially started coming to me. So that was the niche I went after, is to how can I help coaches look better? So it was like the secret weapon behind the scenes, monitoring all the wellness data, looking at the athletes. I immersed myself in their daily training environments. I became a student of each sport I worked with. I worked, multiple different types of sports. I learned to speak their language. I understood the stressors that there's the daily training environment. There's what goes on the field, the ice, the snow, like whatever it is, and in the gym. But there's what else are they dealing with as human beings? So the students, the parent issues, they're fighting with their girlfriend or boyfriend. Like, what other things do they bring to the table? What kind of life are they living? And what is the physiological cost of that? And that needs to be factored. And I started to try to quantify load in a different way, weekly load, not just the load that we prescribe as coaches, but the totality of the load of living under the umbrella of that life, and what they were bringing to the table, and trying to understand the physiological costs of that load so that training could be more effective. because I found that, you've got like working and sliding, later in life, you've got people that are trying to make it like Canadian sport isn't struggling enormously with funding. And so you've got people that are working jobs and trying to compete, in the world stage. Some of them are out and they're training, and there's a lot of training that goes into that. And as you know, it's not like football players that the way they train. It's a lot, and they're balancing that, and then going out and living in a house full of people because they can't afford to live on their own. They're not getting enough food. Some of them working physical jobs. So now you've already come to the table in the whole, energetically, maybe neurologically. And so I'm going to ask you to do this program, and it's not going to work for you. And so I started to quantify what that looks like, and then factor that into the training load and customize it for the individual, and start monitoring signs and symptoms of physiological compromise so that I could adjust the training load in real time for the individuals and coaches so that they could peak on time. And so my approach really became about understanding stress and performance, and knowing that competition doesn't wait. Like, you can't say, I got a game Saturday, but I don't feel ready. Like, you got to show up there. And so it started to develop a knack of understanding what were the key things that an athlete had to leverage to perform in that specific sport. Duct tape and Band-Aid and Bengay the rest at times, and show up ready to play. So a lot of it became managing what was going on behind the scenes. And so people came to me to say, I'm not adapting on time. I feel like I'm going to quit. Here's my symptoms. I'm chronically, I spent a lot of time just listening. I'm chronically sore. I go from injury to injury. I'm irritable, or I'm not irritable anymore. I don't care about anything. All those things, are linked. Chronic, getting sick all the time. I started to do injury profiles and mapping, recovery time, and noting these people are just going from thing, a lot of them. So it's chronic inflammation. So understanding physiologically what can lead to that, like you're spending your life in fight or flight, or the cortisol tap is chronically running, and now you've got no growth hormone, and testosterone's like in the toilet, and we've got to manage your stress, and there's symptoms that show up in people's behavior well before it ever shows up in blood work. So I started doing behavioral monitoring and on a daily basis, and tracking, and then based on that, adjusting the load and making sure I pulled out of training programs the stuff that was, say, most compromising. And so it started to just become a thing that I could do really, really quickly. So in my latter years, I've had people, 3 weeks out from World Championships suddenly inexplicably flatline. I've had to parachute in. So it's become like kind of a 911 MASH unit, like, call me if you've got a performance hotline. I come and see me if an athlete isn't peaking, is flat, completely flat. What do we do? And so it's a lot of interviewing, listening, and then figuring out, understanding the consequences of training and the consequences of the other stuff I've measured over the years. It's like, all right, so we got to pull this out. This has too much neurological drain. We got to do this. We got to do that. I started to just be able to figure that out really, really quickly, and salvage people at the last minute. And so that became sort of a mission. I'm like, there's a lot of people that are not actualizing their potential, not peaking on time, let alone in the season, but more over season, and moreover carrying the load from crappy season into the next season physiologically. So I started to extend that to a bigger, longer map of things that you need to have, and to extend your sport life. That was a lot of explaining. I'm not sure if any of it made sense, but
no, it makes a lot of sense.
I don't even know what the question was in the beginning. I'm sorry. Early here.
No. It was. I think you pretty much answered it. Is what are some of the major performance issues that you're getting from players and coaches? And I think you kind of said you've been able to kind of pick up on it very early because you're a 911 call. right? You're the person that they parachute in, like when somebody's hitting that flat line and is not performing at a high level anymore, or just like kind of feeling like tanking and giving it up and letting go. And I know you work with one of my boys, right? This is how we got here, right? You got Dozier working with you, and obviously he's had a long, great career playing up there in Canada. How has it been for you? Like, how long did it take you to get to this point to where you're able to kind of come in and quickly like assess what people are doing, and what is that onboarding, process like? Like, what are some main areas that you're kind of like locking in on? You're like that's the spot. Like, we really need to tap into that.
It kind of depends on, well, it's taken me a long time. I think one of the detours I took, and so I encourage people coming up in the field to, you may be mad at the detours you take, but there's always some way of teaching you something. So one of my detours was cardiac rehab. It wasn't something I wanted. Honestly, I married a pro athlete. One of us had to make a living, you lived in it, right? Like one of us,
Yep.
the life of this is like, sometimes you're super busy and you're starting at 6 in the morning, and you're done at 11 at night. It's not a career that someone wants to marry you, in this career and raise a child and all that stuff, let alone I married a pro athlete. And so it's like an understanding that, and I handled all his training for 11 of his 14 years. And I was like, I couldn't be hypocritical. I like, you have to get off your legs. I gotta mow the lawn. You gotta stay in bed. Like I started taking on all the jobs and watching the toll of what he was dealing with as an athlete. And a lot of it wasn't even in the gym. A lot of it was, politics, negotiating contracts, infighting on the team, truthfully, a lot of social stressors around family and people wanting something from you, and the bubble. It's a bubble, as you've lived it, right? Like you're in this sort of game you can't describe to anybody who's not there. They just don't get the weird demands of it. And I watched the physiological toll on him, and my career was not helping because I was all over the place. So I took this job in cardiac rehab, and we ended up, our son had some challenges, which it was a blessing that I took the job because it allowed me to be home in regular hours to look after him. But I got into cardiovascular research, and I started working, interestingly, with transplant-listed people who had ejection fractions less than 10% of their left ventricular ejection fractions. I looked at heart function, watched their symptoms. Some of them were young people. How did they get there? And they were presenting, a lot of them, like in terms of their presentation clinically, like people that were overtraining, the athletes. So I had athletes I was working with on the side when I came to work in the day with these very sick people who were basically just battling for life, like on the transplant list. And one of my research projects, was involved around like, how are we going to get them off this list? We did this sort of groundbreaking study, but I listened to them and their concerns and their symptoms. I'm like, oh my gosh, like there's physiological parallels to overtraining, and I watched some of the behavior sets of the athletes, and I sort of lined them up against the behavior sets of cardiac rehab patients, and started to understand, as we got cardiac rehab patients out of their holes and onto life and living and being able to function more normally, I started to apply the same principles in cardiac rehab to the athletes. So I started to, like, an offensive lineman who were doing cardio, and they're like, I can't do that. I have to stay away from that, right? Like, it's going to make me slow. It's going to make me weak. I'm going to lose muscle. But that was, I'm like, there's a way to figure it out so that you're getting this protection. You're able to recover, like something called rate pressure product, your heart rate times your blood pressure, like your workload on the heart. We've got to get that down. And I started to look at players when they retired and how they became. Some of them put on an inordinate amount of weight, really struggled with their health, all sorts of things. I'm like, I'm starting to worry just for my husband at the time's future. Like, you're a huge man, you're carrying this load, you're training this hard, you're managing all the other load. I'm watching this over here going on with these young people that were under stress too, and some of them were incredibly fit that landed in this place. Like, we got to do something about this. So it was that long extended period of learning with both ends of the spectrum that really showed me the bigger health picture and gave me a longer view for sport. which made me not hurry up as much in my programming, which also made coaching athletes a bit different. It was like, yeah, you've got to make this team, and you've only got 4 weeks to do it. There's the short game, and there's things that we know as athletes and coaches you can do to kind of quickly get people to places. But I was like, do you want to play 1 year, or do you want to play 10 or 15? Or do you want to, like, so I started to be like, how does Tom Brady do it? And so I started to use the principles I learned in cardiovascular research and rehab with the performance stuff. They weren't mutually exclusive. And I started to say, if you want to go that far, here's what we got to start to do in the off season. And here's some things we need to add to your program or remove so that they're not so, you're not living in that sympathetic, overload all the time. You've got to protect your adrenals. Here's what happens when we don't. Like, I started to map it. And then I started to make these maps, essentially performance maps. I mean, people who learn about yearly training plans, and, you use those probably yourself as a coach, like the YTPs. But I started to make more of a long-term roadmap for health. And my personal challenge was, you want to play? Like, and I watched my husband, like, you love the game, right? Let's do this. Like, and you're in a sport, and you're in a position, you're defensive lineman, where you're not going to, last long. You're taking hits like crazy. You look like you've been you're beaten with a bat after every game. So let's figure this out and, keep you going as long as possible. And he did. Played 14 years, finished stronger than he started. So it was like, all right, that was not an experiment I intended to run, but living with him, watching him, helping his training, figuring all this load out, helped me sort of come up with a template for how I dealt with other athletes. So it did take me time. It was a journey. I made a lot of mistakes. But I continually was like a dog to a bone with finding solutions. I cared about him being around as a dad for our son. Our son had lots of challenges. We had a son diagnosed with autism. There's a lot of neurological challenges, and neurally atypical people live constantly. Well, they can, in his case, like always afraid and always on edge, and watching his battery get drained all the time. And how could he participate in sport and be successful? And I was in a living laboratory essentially for a very long time. And I would say it took me a long time to figure this out. At the same time, I had to figure it out while we were in the moment because the real challenges came up. So I can't really say how I got here, except I remained curious. I was hyper vigilant about making sure that health was at the forefront, and a longevity plan. And that meant training people a little bit differently, a longer game, and convincing people to trust me. You're not going to be fast once, you're going to be fast all season. But it may look different getting there. And so that became my brand promise.
So then, I know we talked about earlier that, you went into working with some of these old linemen and you're a female, right? Looking up to these big old dudes, right? How was it, to get them to buy in, especially coming from the women's perspective? You know what I mean? Because a lot of people will say, like, what do you have like in correlation with them? And like, how do you get like a male athlete to kind of listen to what you're doing? Because I know I think back to my career being an athlete. Really, the only women that were in the industry at the time when I was doing stuff were like our PTs, right? And now we see more women coming into the coaching realm of strength conditioning coaches and coaching football and whatnot. And then you said you're living it day to day. Like, how was it balancing all this stuff out and then also going down your own journey?
Well, it was an ask. It was, excuse my language, but it was like it wasn't easy. But I think one of the things like I said, I had that experience where I was really blessed with this scout inviting me into Inner Sanctum, and then the fellow that called that day, he sat down and he shot straight with me. I don't know that this conversation would happen today and go over the same way in our current climate, but he said, "Let's be frank. You're a woman, and you don't look like everybody else doing this." And at the time, I was around the days of Charles Poliquin. I don't know if you ever heard of him or read any. He was like a juggernaut in the road strength conditioning. Another guy that's trained in Calgary Flames, who I still work with to this day. He's like, "You have a lot stacked against you, and this is pretty like, who do you think you are?" In some way. At the same time, I'm taking a chance on you. And I said to him, he's like, you're going to have to work really, really hard to convince him. You need a different angle. You're going to need to, he actually told me, like you got to show up. You're tall, you're thin, you're athletic looking, but you're not going to sell this. And you're going to have to sell the science. And I said, you're right. I know. I'm going to have to tell these people what possibly could derail their training and how they were going to get the best return on investment for their efforts. So what I said to them, he's like, you've got to sell it differently. We're going to market you as a scientist, because that's what you have to be. You're not going to be a strength and conditioning person. We're going to leverage the science. And he worked with NHL for years. So we got to get them to listen to you. And so I'm like, got it. So I said to myself, I'm not going to go out there and try to be like a football coach. I'm not going to make it there. I'm not going to go out there. I actually took, I know I applaud all the women that are doing that right now. Like, it took me to 2022 and all this years to be able to step on the field as women are getting hired as coaches. But I was still even stood on the field as I went to the stamps, and I was like, I'm not here to tell you what to do. Like I'm here. I'm here to help you do it better. And so I said that to the offensive line that day. I said, yeah, look at me. I understand hypertrophy though. Here's what I learned. I can make sure that your return on your investment. I talked to them. How's your training been going? How many hours you put into this? What does this look like? How about it? What if I said you could do it in half the time? What if I could show you that more, less is more? What if I could explain to you what could happen? And I started to just say, let's start with education. And so they listened to that. And thankfully, one guy on the team, who was the center at the time, was really like interested. And he's like, yeah, listen, I want to know, because he's been pulling his calf. Someone had a bicep rupture. There was all sorts of stuff going on this line. They also had a running quarterback. They were big. They were sloppy. They couldn't run. They just come off of a quarterback, Doug Flutie, and they had Jeff Garcia. And so they're like, and the guards are like, we got to learn to pull better. And I'm like, let's, show me how you run. And I was like, yikes. I was like, okay, so I'm not being, let me, like, help me help you. Because, yeah, there's obviously a difference here. And I didn't fight it. I didn't try to hide it. I acknowledged it. I led with that. I said, but here's what I understand. And here's what I've learned. And how about we work together to make it go faster and have you, make better returns. So let's look at what you're doing and let's see what we can get rid of. And so we started to pull stuff out. And I got buy-in from one, and then it became buy-in from two, and then they were stronger, and then they were faster. And one had to gain a whole bunch of weight. And we did that, without supplementation. And I'm like, just trust. It happened to be the person I married. I said, he put on 22 pounds in the off season, and he was training half what he trained. I mean, these guys were like training 3 times a day. They were pushing a car, and that in the day, there was their coach had them push a car in the parking lot. He'd ride the brake and make them just push this car. Like, I was like, oh my goodness, like, someone's going to have a heart attack. And so I was like, let's just do this safely. Do you want to be, I appealed to that, their common sense. And they listened, and they tried, and it worked. And then then it led to another person. So I became that person that they trusted, because I didn't try to BS them and bamboozle them and say, I know all this stuff, because I hadn't been in their shoes. All I could say was, here are some things that will make it go faster and be more effective. And I've always kept to that. So when I walk into a space, I'm like, I don't profess to know how you live. Let me understand it. I don't come in and say, boom, this is how you have to do your program. I actually go and live in the daily training environment and go, wow. I listen to how the coaches talk. I listen and understand when the players have to show up for practice, what the day looks like, the demands on them. I've watched many, many, many training camps, more than I can ever count. And understand, like, why this training camp? Why how many practices a day? Why are you doing, like, because it doesn't make sense from a training perspective, but I understand there's a last man standing mentality, and you've got to get there. So I'm like, okay, you've got to last to the end of this training camp and still show up and be some semblance of, sanity and playing well and showing up well. Like, and so I started to reverse engineer what they needed physiologically and tying that to the training, and then saying, let's make a plan. so that you're standing upright and well at the end of this. And here's what we're going to do. And then I started monitoring, all sorts of wellness data and things like that to keep them going and adjusting their training. But it took building trust, having that rapport, not trying to bamboozle them, not trying to be something that I wasn't. And I started to compete. So I guess that let me in. They got me trust, and they let me into they as in you, me in and let me talk. Like, they trusted me to tell me their problems, because I also said things like, listen, like, there's a hidden cost to the stress of, the stress onto itself of trying to be front facing and happy and great and, oh my gosh, it's great. And I'm a pro athlete and look at me and this is a wonderful lifestyle. And the truth behind the scenes, it's not. There's a lot of stress and there's a lot of pain and there's a lot of disappointment. And so there's this front facing view, and then there's the behind the scenes. And often the cost of the stress in that front facing view is a lot of unhealthy behaviors behind the scenes that are there. There's a physiological path to that. And so, there's whether it's drinking too much, self-harming behaviors, all manner of eating disorders, or disordered eating, any of those types of things that happen to help you cope with being this big person over here, that I'm like, the two are eventually going to hit heads, and we've got to deal with them and keep it going anyway, because the cost of you not playing is going to be higher than, going to be more devastating. So I had to dig into that and get them to trust me to talk about some of the bad things they were doing, and then doing so without judgment and saying, hey, there's a physiological reason these things happen. When you have too much stress hormone, here's what happens. Here's what this looks like. And sort of taking the judgment or character judgment out of all this stuff and tying it very objectively to science, so that people would be like, this is fixable. And it is fixable. So that's been the way I've led with it. So I don't know any other way.
That's awesome. I mean, it really is awesome to have someone like you in this space and helping the guys out. Especially, talking to Brandon, myself, hearing the stuff that you've been helping him with. But, have you, once guys are done playing, do you continue to work with them and help them out? And what has that been like? What's the relationship like? And what are some things that you're hearing, guys that are struggling with, like, once they're done, like once ball is over?
Well, it was an interesting statistic I got from previous CEO of our Olympic site in Calgary. Said that he was the president of the NHL Players Association. Said 83% of marriages end in divorce a year after retirement, because in the NHL, and I think that's a transferable number across sport. Like, obviously, we didn't make it either, as much as I knew. And thankfully, we're good friends, and I still design my ex's training. He has a very different career now, but the stress of your identity being challenged, you really are in a bubble. You've lived it. I lived the bubble. It's a magical place and it's a terrible place at the same time, and nobody understands the demands in there. And then you get out of the bubble, and it's like, you're nobody. You can feel like a nobody, or you don't have value, because your value is tied so much to the game and what you can do through the game, or whatever the sport was. So a really big part of preparing, or the after, is what you do before, and preparing people before for that place. So, as you're extending sport life, it's like evaluating how you're managing that for your family. What are your other options for your career? Like, making sure, the Canadian sport system has a great place called the game plan. Canadian sport institutes across the country that really helps develop, counsel athletes as to what are their options and how they can make a meaningful contribution to sport. Alumni associations, even just adjusting to what happens to your body when you have, swimmers, like swimmers. My research is in swimming, currently doing now. But, they swim so much, they eat so much. The same with, and then to suddenly stop that, like, their body goes into absolute shock. So how are they going to manage the change in training? Mapping out a plan so they keep training and they basically come off the training, but it's a slow process. They're still going to the gym, they're still training similarly, they're still connecting with people outside of the sport that have also retired, like really working on a one-night engagement. And then also helping them identify, like, is this the end of the road? Are there talent transfer opportunities? Like, this is, I work in a second chance sport with bobsleigh Canada skeleton. Like, bobsleigh is a second chance sport. Like, we just hired, Jesse Lumsden, who, played in CFL and was a bobsleigh athlete as our high performance director. Just recently just started. So, he went in from football to bobsleigh. We've got a bunch of athletes that are playing in the CFL or coming out of the CFL that are on bobsleigh. Like, so are you done with sport? What are the opportunities? So some of them, shuttle to that sport. Do you want to do coaching opportunities? Do you want to continue to give back? Some people need a complete break. I don't know how you felt about it. You don't want to have anything to do with it, but it's starting that process early and then making sure there's a lot of support around them. But also not just to, hey, because your life's different, but, physically, like coming down off of that massive amount of training and competition volume, and how the physiological toll of that, and how you just can't stop cold turkey. We would have sort of almost like training withdrawal symptoms. So we've got to plan training so that you are still looking after and honoring your body, and you can come out of this craziness in a safe way. And then, so comparing, that's the after, but then I've been going down younger and younger down the chain as I've been doing some more work on long-term development, understanding growth and development, ages and stages of growth and development, how to affect sport performance, to educating kids younger and younger and athletes before they get to that level around really understanding their why. Mom talks, like one of the biggest, you probably know this, one of the biggest physiological sinkholes is social support and a lack of it. Bullying, abuse, the culture within the sport, or around it, how well the athletes are supported in their daily life has a huge physiological impact. And so I've learned that has, and the research shows that and backs that up. So, talking to kids early about the friends they choose. Sometimes it's like your ride or dies. Who are those people that are going to show up for you when you're winning and you're losing? And learning that early, so you're not, it's hard. It's a hard lesson when you're successful, to see how many people might run away or turn on you. It's a strange thing. Or people come out of the woodwork and suddenly want to be your friend because you're successful. Like, it's really a hard thing for a younger developing athlete to handle, but not just younger, like into your 20s and 30s. I don't know if it's ever easy. So understanding that early and being like, and learning to make values-based decisions. So we do a little bit of values-based decision making. I have something called a performance review, like, tongue-in-cheek performance review, like a job thing, like, and looking at all the different ways that an athlete can be successful even when they're not, physically on the field, understanding the physiological consequences of not doing that, the side, the technical side, the mental performance side, and what are the how to make decisions that are aligned with those values, because there is a cost physiologically when you don't. Like, I tie everything back to science, and I make a case for it. And younger athletes, like, let's look at that. Like, one of the exercises they give them is like, pick, a values exercise. Now, 14-year-old boy, do they know their values? Well, it could be video games. So maybe it's not values; it's what they care about, prioritize. And helping them even make decisions that are aligned with that. So pick 4 things that you value right now. It could be, video games, hockey, friends. I don't know what the 4th one could be. And then, all right, so, scenario-based learning. We do that in our intake process. Like, my intake process is very fulsome. It's not just physical testing. So I sit down and we'll talk to people. Let's have a real look at what you're doing. What are the other things you're balancing? Would you be interested in learning about how training can work better for you? And other opportunities, key performance indicators that will help you be successful. The kids ask stakeholders to come, get parents or whoever their stakeholders are in the journey, that are going to be helping steward their diet, driving. The same with parents is, if you've been coaching, some younger people are trying to build a superstar at 11, and so they've got their kids in 8 dryland programs and what's going on in the sport. And so the education, upfront education, is really, really important as to what the cost of that is. but making decisions, teaching them early. Like, so say you say hockey is your number one priority. I had this conversation with a group of AAA midget. They were wanting to break into they want to play WHL, they wanted to get into the NHL eventually. Like, so they're all battling with dealing with girlfriends and things like this. And so you got a tournament the next day. You got to be on the ice at 7. You say hockey's the most important priority to you, or values / priorities are the same thing, but in a younger mind, that's what they can get. So someone asks you, your girlfriend asks you to go out on Friday night. And you have to sing. So you've said your values are this. So what's the decision you make? And your values truly say no. It's easy. Decision making made easy. It's black and white. These are the things I'm going to remind myself to when you do a quick check. I said hockey. I want to do on this tournament. I'm not going to say yes. I'm going to say no. And then girlfriend flips out. She's not supportive. Then maybe you need a backup. I'm not saying that, but maybe that's it's basically life lessons. Like, how do you start making decisions that align with your values? Are important. Once you sort of know what those are, and they can shift, and they do ultimately. I'm sure there's not people that maybe say that their priority is video games, the way they did in 14. Maybe they do. No judgment there, but it doesn't matter what your priorities are. Like, when you don't make decisions in alignment with that, there is a cost to that. There's stress. There's a lot of worry. There's a lot of pain and angst, and maybe a cost to your playing. You stayed up too late. You didn't play well. Coach is mad. Now you're dealing with that. So reverse engineered the long and short of it. That's a lot of information, but is sit down and get to know who you are. My process is I would like to sit down and just get to know why you're doing this, and how are there opportunities that I can help you be better. Let's look at your training. What are you doing currently? What are the other things you're dealing with? What are your other priorities? Let's manage that, because we need to factor training into this. You get enough time to recover. What are some of the things that are really bothering you? Here's some opportunities to improve, even if you're not training. Review all those opportunities. Same things that are in MIT, cognitive, technical, the mental performance diet, all the physiological, basic things around physiology, just sleep patterns, nutrition, training program, all that kind of stuff. And then we look for opportunities, and then I say, where can I help you with those opportunities? So I identify up front, where I can be, where I can potentially lend a hand, or where I can approach people out that may be more, I identify what may be the biggest barrier to performance at that particular time. Because the idea is we need to get this competition. So let's see where we can pick up some low-hanging fruit, some quick wins. Where are some things that are going to potentially be stumbling blocks, and resource those out, or say, like, make a plan to mitigate them for the time frame that we have, and I go from there. So that's where I start before I ever do any physical testing. It's looking at that kind of stuff. So it's a realistic program.
No, it's all very important, because I think back to like my career, and I'm thinking, man, I wish like when I was at my younger age, I had someone around like you to kind of help me navigate the space, figure out my priorities. But not only that, like, I come from the old school coaching where plan A is plan A, right? Like, there is no wavering off of it. Like, if you want to play football, it's strictly football, and you're going to be a professional athlete in that. But like, there were times in there where I questioned, like, what is next for me? Like, what have I been trained to do? What am I capable of doing? Like, when football does end, like, what are my options? Like, what could I do with like work? Because I haven't had opportunity to take internships. I haven't had the opportunity to learn sales. Like, because all I've been doing is just worrying about football, right? I think that's why this podcast has been so important to me, with just kind of like what the next steps were. Like, once football was over, is like just learning, from some of the top people, not only in the industry of just strength and conditioning, but on the mental side, physiological side, like all the sides that go into, coaching and training athletes and being a great coach. And that's why I think it's super important for a person like you to come on and like speak about the things that you're doing with these athletes, and athletes for like what they're doing afterwards. But if you look at 16, 17-year-old Tara now, so far in your journey, what would be like some of the key things, or what some of the top advice you would give to her?
Well, I think when you come outside of 16 or 17, you realize, gosh, I worried about things I shouldn't have ever worried about. But I would say I would have changed, I would have encouraged her to change her circle, people that she spent her time with, and really not listen to the naysayers. I think that was a big thing, and not say that voices in my life that it wasn't very capable of shutting down. So I would have maybe made some told her to be brave and walk away in some situations in my life, because I was constantly battling. I still feel like that's an issue for me now, is what I know to be true about what I want to do and who I am and what I enjoy with the demands of other people. And I found like I was always coming to the field with a huge load of what is this going to happen? What's going to happen over here with my family? What's going to happen over this? What if I don't do this? I don't remember a time where I ever went out to the field and could set that down. I've always felt like, however I felt that way, for whatever reason, that I didn't have permission to fly, that really hurt me, and it hurts me for other people. It genuinely hurts me for other people, because I feel like I've been given gifts and abilities to use them, need to use them. And so if you're in a situation where you can't, it's like, ask for help, get out of them, and there is help. There's so much help there. Like, there's so many opportunities. It takes a village. It's not all on your shoulders. So I would have encouraged her to, not give up, and relentlessly pursue people that will help you be the best version of yourself. I didn't have that. I didn't make the best choices either. I took ownership of that myself, but I would have encouraged her and said, there's light. And so I've taken it on myself. As on the female side, there's a lot of girls, girls have to drop out of sport. The stat apparently is still 6 times more likely to drop out of sport than guys and their age, and particularly that's a vulnerable age. And it also starts to grow development. You don't know, the prefrontal cortex is being formed. I mean, there's a lot of crazy things that go on in your mind at that particular. So, I would try to convince people. That's why I'm seeing people a lot of joining my office in one job. I'm saying we're ready, we're done, and eventually mom and dad and everything. And 9 times out of 10, there's some conversation, some real connection, and understanding too of all of the demands on that particular individual. I mean, just growing and developing, let alone all the other stuff they're dealing with. 90% of the time, they don't want to quit. They're just in a place which is genuinely burnt out. And if we can figure out a way to keep them going anyway, and support them, even if it's in a transition period of like partial play, modified training, any of those types of things, get them some good rest, help deal with some of their issues. They're going to bounce out of that terrible hormonal swirl and be like, I really wish I wouldn't have quit. I really wish I would have tried. So I've been trying to in my own time, educate and mentor females in sport, align myself with various causes, and become a mentor to young athletes to or be the person that actually sits beside them. And down different training and training and all the stuff. So I don't know if that's what I would say to myself, but I think I would just be like, there's another way here. Like, don't give up until you try it. Find it. You're worth it. You don't have to settle in this place. And so that's why I try really hard to still enjoy it. Yeah, I didn't get to go and do that US scholarship thing. Didn't get to do those things. I can help others do it, and I still play, still be involved in sport.
Love it. You got me to be a believer, right? Like I love the work that you're doing and love everything that you got going on. I might be coming to you to figure out, what life is like after retirement and how to navigate this whole space and everything. But before we get out of here, we got our last segment of the day. It's the 60-second round, right? It is 10 questions, right? And it's 1-word answers. Are you ready for it? All right, here we go. 60 seconds on the clock. First question. What is your favorite post-workout snack? Favorite post-workout snack? Favorite sport? Dream vacation spot? Guilty pleasure food? Best gym you've ever been to.
One in Calgary, CSI.
Favorite movie genre.
Like Born Identities.
Dream car.
Right.
What is your number one flaw as a coach?
Care too much.
If you could be in an octagon with a gorilla, tiger, or bear, which one would you choose?
I would say gorilla.
And that is it. Tara, thank you for being here with us today, and thank you for taking out the time. I know it's super early where you're at, but thank you so much for being here and dropping a bunch of knowledge and a bunch of information. If you guys have the opportunity, definitely check out Coach Tara. She's doing a lot of great stuff, not only just from the strength conditioning side, but all across the board. She has a bunch of knowledge in the game. Again, like we said, over 25 years in the game, right? There's a lot to be learned from her, as I sat here and learned from her today. So thank you for being here with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great. And I feel like we could talk all day about so much stuff. So yeah, let's do this again.
Oh, we'll be in contact. We'll talk some more.
And all the very best for this platform. I'm super excited for what you're doing. Yeah.
Thank you.
The game.
Okay, and we're out.
We're out.